So let me begin. A few years ago, I began this study of the ways in which culture is shaping clergy and laity in Canada and Britain. And my sense at the time was that I would find cultural influences getting into our churches, and that these cultural influences would be largely eclectic, relativistic, chaotic, individualistic, whatever the word is you like there. And so I thought what I would see is it's kind of like the ancient Israel in the time of Judges, where there was no king in Israel, so everyone did what was right in their own eyes. But I was only partly right about their prediction. What I found instead was a coherent, dominant cultural narrative that is international in scope and pervasive across multiple institutions. So what I'm saying is that this dominant cultural narrative is not just in people's heads. It's not just a mind map or a cultural map that they hold in their brains, which guides their ways of thinking. I'm also saying that the society is full of institutional carriers. That is, this same narrative is being promoted in most of our institutions, particularly in our schools, our healthcare, our government, and a variety of other places, not just in people's heads. So that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to try to map that thing for us today. First thing that I'm going to do, though, is, let's set up the study. 120 interviews, 120 plus interviews of evangelical clergy and active laity in at least 65 different churches in Britain and Canada. So that's sort of the background data for this study. And what I found was that I saw pictures of this evidence of this cultural milieu, what I'm going to call the zeitgeist, the cultural zeitgeist coming into our churches and shaping evangelical orthodoxy and orthopraxy. So let me start by showing how this new way of thinking, it's not new, but this way of thinking has changed our society, particularly in the area of religion. There we go. Basically, what we're finding is that this new kind of spirituality is undermining traditional institutional religiosity. So in this slide, you'll see evidence of declining weekly church attendance in England. And not surprising, weekly attendance was back in 1980 close to 10%, and now is in that 5% range and will continue to go down. In Britain as well, we're seeing a quick decline in the percent of the population who are Christian. So back in 2001, the census showed about 77% Christian by affiliation. By 2011, it was 59%. And by 2001, I can't quite see my data because of the pictures, but it's somewhere around below 50%. There it is, sorry, 31%, 37%. Just below 50%. And now the nuns, people who claim no religious affiliation, is growing at about 10 to 12% a decade. So now it's at 37%. If we go back to 2001, it was about 16%. So we're seeing this real quick increase in disaffiliation of Christians, a decline in that. At the same time, we're seeing a great increase in people who claim no religion, and we're seeing a quick decline in people who are regularly attending church. If we go to Canada, I thank Rick Heemstra at EFC for this slide. Many of you know him. What we see in Canada is a similar trajectory as far as weekly attendance goes. All the little dots there are a variety of different polls over time. And back in 1946, we see as high as 67% claim they were at church on a weekly basis. And now, if you can see the small print on the right, pre-COVID at about 2019, that poll would be. It was about 11% weekly attendance, and now, and during COVID, it says around 9% weekly attendance. So what we know about this direction now is that we're seeing a rapid decrease, and that the COVID experience accelerated that decrease, which will not be a surprise to, I think, just about anybody on the call. As far as affiliation goes, we are growing quickly in like in Britain. We are growing quickly in the number of people who claim no religion, and declining quickly in the percentage of the population who claim to be Christian. So in 2021 census, 53% of the population claimed to be Christian. It was 67% in 2011 and 77% in 2001. And we were at 34% in Canada who claim no religious affiliation now as of the 2021 census. And that's down to about half, that's doubled in the last 20 years or so. Basically what I'm saying is we see a similar trajectory across the West. The trajectory is basically we're losing 10 to 15% of people who affiliate with Christian a decade in these, at least in these two countries, and we're seeing a comparative increase in the number of people who claim no religious affiliation at all. So that's the direction. At least half of our population in Canada would probably have not experienced church at all. So that's growing quickly. Another slide from my friend Rick Eamster at EFC. What you see with all these funky little things is an increase in the number of people with no religion. That's the gray on top. And a declining number of people who would claim evangelical affiliation. That's the green going across. And as you see, mainline Protestants, the red declining, and Catholics, the dark blue and the blue on the bottom, also generally declining as well. The difference between the 2019 and 2021 poll is just probably random error. We don't think we're actually upswinging in any sort of way. So that is the case. Anyway, the polls are showing even higher levels of disaffiliation than is the census. It seems like the census, people still want to at least identify with their family tradition. Whereas when we go to polls, it's probably the case that Christians are now a minority in Canada. All right. I don't have to tell you about volunteering and giving. Canadians are giving less to churches. Of their giving, it's a smaller percentage over time, and they're giving less across the board. They're also volunteering less across the board, and the percent that they're volunteering for religious organizations is also declining quicker as a percentage. So we're seeing this decline in general. So why is this? Well, what I'm suggesting to you is that what we are seeing now are surface evidence, symptoms of a much greater and more powerful and long-lasting cultural turn, which I am going to call the move to an internal locus of authority. But other people before me have called this the inward turn. Some have called it the subjective turn. Charles Taylor, famous philosopher, Canadian philosopher, talks of the massive subjective turn in modern culture. Not new, back in 91. Heelis and Woodhead in Britain say the subjective turn is becoming the defining cultural moment in modern Western culture. By subjective, they mean personal, right? It's internal to me. My world is now defined by me. I call this a move from the external locus of authority to an internal locus of authority. So let me try to unpack that a bit. An external locus of authority looks like this. You might have to go back to your grandparents to remember people who were like this, but this was typical maybe of the silent generation before the baby boom. The 1960s changed all that, by the way. So the external locus of authority looks like institutional authority. They tend to defer to what the government told them, particularly because they were shaped by the war. Whatever the government said, they did. They went and fought if the government said so. They tended to believe what their pastor or their priest said and just defer to that. They go to their doctor and their doctor says this, and they say, yes, sir, yes, sir. That was just the norm way we thought. We didn't know, the experts did. There is a deference to institutions and cultural norms. Generally, people followed the cultural norms that were out there and they thought they were good and that they should submit to them. Beliefs, behaviors, aspirations were all prescribed externally by external authorities, and people largely accepted them. The duty and loyalty to institutions was strong. Deference to the teachings of how we should live and what we should believe was largely stronger than an internal sense of what they should do. Identity, that is who I am, who I consider myself to be, was largely ascribed. I mean by that, given at birth. That is, I'm a white heterosexual male, and that was something that I just always will be and probably the fact that I'm Baptist or whatever is something that I always will be. Those things were just given to me. They were handed down to me by my family, and they tended to be pretty stable. The internal locus of authority, particularly the baby boom and on, looks like more like this. Individual authority, that is, the locus of authority is no longer in the institutions, and that I intake external authority that guides my life from outside in. That is largely changed. Now the locus of authority is inside of me, and my own personal intuition and gut is what guides how I think and what I believe. Individual authority, and that's different than everybody else because everybody is a unique individual. This, then, my approach to institutions around me is much more consumeristic. If the institutions around me help me on my own path, then I might use them at least for a while. But I'll pick and choose from my institutions to the degree that I find them helpful in my own personal quest. Behaviors, aspirations are discovered and chosen. I decide what I believe. I decide what I should do. Inwardly guided, and identity then is created by me. I have to find out who I am. I have to discover myself. And therefore it changes over time. It's much less stable. Okay. This is what some of the big shots say about this whole idea. So it's not all original with me, even though some of the wording is. Subjectivization is if not the major cause of such secularization in the post-war period, to British sociologists. For many people today, to set aside their own path in order to conform to some external authority just doesn't seem comprehensible as a form of spiritual life. Eminent philosopher Charles Taylor, out of McGill. Contemporary quests for spirituality are really yearning for a reconstructed interior life. Wade Clark Roof out of the US back in the 90s, by the way. So people were recognizing this move toward an internal locus of authority, or this subjectivization, or this inward turn back right after the 60s, which really was a catalyst to the change. So we see it in the baby boom, but it's probably even stronger in the millennials and Gen Zs. Okay. I presented these two things as two categories, but that's really not the case. It really is a continuum. There's probably no perfectly external person, and there's probably no perfectly internal person. We are on a continuum between there and on one side, the external, and on the other side, internal. And most people are a mix. So the younger people tend to be to the right, a little more internal. Older people tend to be a little more toward the left. People who are in your churches regularly are probably leaning toward the external locus of authority side, because they at least accept the idea that the Bible or the church or some external authority should have the right to speak into their lives, even if they might disagree on occasion, or maybe often, as they lean more in the internal direction. All right. So I said that there is a consistent, coherent, culturally prescribed, institutionally carried narrative of what spirituality is. And this is my best effort to describe that thing, okay? So after I describe this thing, I'm hoping you'll say something like, yes, I'm seeing that, or no, actually, Dr. Reimer, I'm not seeing that at all. So I would like to know that, okay? All right, so it looks like this. First, I'm going to talk about a consistent means to the end, instrumental, right? How we get to a telic end. There is a clear prescription in our society of how we get to that spiritual end. Okay, and this is what I'm suggesting it looks like. The means to the end, self-spirituality. This is a private journey. We are all on our own individual path. It is my job as an individual person to find my own path. There might be some practices along the way that will be helpful for me on my individual journey. It might be yoga, it might be meditation, it might be mindfulness, it might be Tai Chi, it might even be going to a church, at least for a bit. All of this is to counter the dis-ease that exists in me, my own lack of personal well-being, and I'm moving toward finding wholeness, and spirituality can help me find that wholeness. So institutional religion, i.e. your church, might be helpful for a time on this journey to the degree that I sense that it helps me toward wholeness. But the path is mine, not yours. I have to find it myself. And so I might be there for a while, and then I might move on because my quest takes me elsewhere. Perennialism. Perennialism basically says that at their core, all religions are the same. So beneath all the layers of historical division and all these people who are not whole, views that distinguish one religion from the other, basically all religions teach the same thing, and that is how to be a good person and how to live in harmony with other people. That's what religions teach. The core is the same. And so if people are creating division between religions, it's because they are unenlightened or because they are full of dis-ease. So naturally then, religion is fine. You can pick your religion for a time that works for you. I'll pick my religion. That's good because they're all fundamentally the same anyway about what they're really about. And what that also means is that bricolage is common. I pick and choose like food options in a smorgasbord. I pick and choose those parts of religiosity that work for me out of Buddhism, or I might pick a little bit of Islam, or I might dabble a little bit of Christianity, or I might find my own inner spiritual quest. And all these things come together in sort of this pastiche, this mix of spirituality that is uniquely me. Inner epistemology. How do I know? How do I know what truth is? Well, it comes from inside of me. How do I know I found truth? Well, when my heart tells me so. When my inner intuition says that this is right. When I have a warm, joyous, whole, happy, internal sense. That's when I know I found it. So, how do I know morality? What is right and wrong? How do I know spirituality? What is sacred? The answer is I know that internally. I sense it. I intuit it. I know it because of my own inner voice. Personal liberty. Obviously, if I'm on my own spiritual quest, then what is necessary is that external authorities and external restraints or constraints are not slowing me down. People are trying to tell me who I should be, but those people are barriers in my own personal quest. I have to find myself. So I need personal liberty and I need individual rights in order to fully express myself and truly find myself. Therefore, personal liberty is sacralized, as are global individual rights. Impediments come when other people try to force me into their mold. I must overcome these impediments and continue freedom toward finding myself. God is moved. I now can gain from an immanent God. This is Charles Taylor's words. God is relocated from the transcendent to the internal, to the immanent, to the inside of me. See, the divine pervades everything around me and also me. It's this big life force that exists everywhere around us. And since I have an internal locus of authority, it is pretty easy for me to sacralize that thing. It's really the God within. My own inner intuition is now sacralized as divinely right. And so on my path, I must listen to myself. The distinction between the God's voice and my own voice is probably indiscernible, because it is all about that warm sense, that sense in the heart that this is right. And so that becomes sacred. All right, what's the end? What's the telic end? What's the goal we're working for? I've already said that's the means, that's how we get there, but what's the end? The end is to find the authentic self. I am told I must find the real me, my true self. I am told to be true to myself and be who I am. You cannot define the true self for me because everybody is an original. We are all unique. And we're all on the same quest toward the inner self. By the way, the picture of the authentic self is the picture on the right. When I find my authentic self, I am beautiful and I am at peace. That's how I know I'm there. The swan on calm waters. In the meantime, I'm surrounded by everybody who's trying to tell me what to say, what I should be, and I look like the ugly duckling, right? You get the old story, right? The ugly duckling who really turns into the beautiful swan. That's the process of finding the authentic self. So I actually have two selves. I have the authentic self and I have the mundane self. The mundane self is that which is shaped by the forces around me, the external authorities, particularly around me. It is the conventional, the unnatural, the socialized self, the unreal, who I really am not, that has pushed me into who people want me to be. But my authentic self is my real, higher, deeper, truer, more natural self. And that self is what I have to discover. I have to find that beyond, or maybe behind, the mundane self that has been pressured on me. The authentic self is good and powerful. The Christian view, of course, is that humans are made in the image of God, good, but that they are also bad. They are sinners. But if I can get to my authentic self, it is only good. Not good and bad, just good. It is harmonious with other people in the world. It is full of compassion and kindness. It is whole. I feel great in my heart. And so, but it's also powerful. You, my friend, have an inner superpower. And once you find your authentic self, that superpower will be revealed. Something that other people don't see in you yet, but is incredibly influential and has such great potential. External forces, external authorities, say like pastors, for example, might indeed be roadblocks on my way to finding myself, maybe professors too. And they tend to distort my true self. My path, my individual path, is full of obstacles. It is full of hardships. It is full of adversity. Oh, that is a popular word. I'm facing adversity, which basically means often I don't feel whole. Fears, insecurities, unkindness are probably because I've been misshaped. I am diseased. Immoral behavior is because of my distorted self that's been misshapen by society. But I cannot just justify my own insecurities and my own pain and my own misbehaviors. I am responsible as the guide of my own journey to find my inner self. And for those who do not do that, they're giving up a personal purpose of their lives. So find your inner self, keep going. And everybody along the way needs to affirm that self, because it is so fraught by difficulty as it is, that for you not to affirm it is indeed not only an obstacle, but an oppression. All right, I painted that kind of strong. I'm going to stop for some questions if I can get out a full screen here and see what those are, or someone can shout them out for me if you have them. Does this resonate with what you're seeing out there?
We just have a couple of questions there in the chat box, Dr. Reimer, and they can jump in if I missed when they put them into the chat box, just keep them in their context. I think this is when you were showing the graphs of decline in attendance, and Dr. Britton asked, are there any specific breakdowns, i.e. stats of Canadian Baptists or of African Canadians as a smaller percentage of the population? So are those trends going in those smaller groups as well?
So I can't answer specifically for the Baptists, but generally the trend started to peak unlike the mainline Protestants and some Catholics, which peaked around the 1960s and then started going down from there. For evangelicals, it probably peaked around the 1990s. We are riding the top of the bubble, but I think the trajectory is down. And I think that trajectory is down, particularly since COVID. So we're seeing a pretty strong decline. We're going to the other side of the bubble, if you like, and starting the decline. So it's the same trajectory probably, but delayed. Do I think the trajectory is going to be as fast? I would say no. I think that because evangelicals do a better job of their youth and engaging people with a higher level of commitment, that the decline is going to be slower. But with our birth trajectories and our immigration's helping here, but not enough to keep it up. We're losing people left, right, and center, including a lot of our youth who are moving toward being unaffiliated ultimately.
Okay, thank you. Chris Greer is mentioning an article in Christianity Today. It was pointed out that many baby boomers who built today's churches are leaving because they have found that the church was not effective in reaching their children and grandchildren as they had hoped. Have you seen this trend, and how do you feel it will affect the church?
The answer is yes, we have. And like I said, they're not going elsewhere. They're going to no religion, generally across the board. So evangelicals who were weekly attenders growing up are now running at about 2/3 of those that were as children weekly attenders. Now about 2/3 of those are attending somewhat regularly, though I think that went down, of course, over COVID. And I think the trajectory suggests now that they'll continue. There'll be a lot of people who don't come back. So we're losing a lot of evangelicals. And if we're looking at Catholics and mainline Protestants, it's more like 2/3 lost to the nuts.
Okay. Rob Nyland says he's asking for a friend, but does anyone ever achieve swan-like status?
Well, of course, Rob. Yeah, I don't know if that's, I think that our fallen nature means we don't get there in reality, but people are trying to get there, and they're following their guru influencers online in their effort to get there, who they think are as about as authentic as they possibly a human can be. So there you go. All right, I'll carry on here and talk about how this is shaping Christians, and then, of course, open it up again once I get through this. Again, here I want you to be thinking about, am I seeing this on the ground? And what then shall we do if our churches are bringing in people like this? All right, who have this kind of internal locus of authority, have experienced the inward turn, the things that I just talked about. Okay, so what does this look like on the ground in broad strokes? The first one is low denominational and congregational loyalty. If I am responsible for my own inner path and I have to find my own journey, then my loyalty to a denomination or a congregation is going to be low. They are not responsible, I am. And so the degree to which they are helping me find my own inner wholeness is the degree to which I will make use of them. What that means, I think, is that if people around me in my church make me feel warm and positive and good, then I will stay. But as soon as that doesn't happen, I might go. I'm talking about someone with a pretty strong internal locus of authority, okay? Not everybody's there. All right. Little interest in creeds. What's the difference between a Baptist and a Wesleyan? Like, who cares, right? I mean, these people don't care about minutiae of the creeds, because what matters is I am my own authority and I have to guide my own beliefs. And so you can have all your discussions about whether you're being orthodox or whatever, that's all fine. But for me, I got to decide for myself anyway. So I'm not interested in your creeds, in your official doctrines, and those kind of things. Not very interesting at all. These things, by the way, are just pretty relative, right? There's disagreement on religious stuff, maybe a little less like science, where we tend to agree a little more. And so this is just completely up to the individual. And by the way, someone with a strong internal locus of authority will sit in your church and happily disagree. And that's okay, because she or he will be thinking, that's the pastor's view. Okay, yeah, that's fine. But I got to make up my own mind about these things. So the cognitive dissonance is not that hard, right? Even though they're hearing things they might not agree with. Comfortable with diverse religious views. So you believe you thing, I believe I do me, you do you, and I'm comfortable with diverse religious views. I kind of talked about that idea already. Moving on. Practices are increasingly sporadic and therapeutic. If you read in the latter chapters of my book, you will see that I suggest that people are doing religious practices like they do social media. Just like they look at their smartphone on occasion, their devotional practice might be looking up the verse of the day. Or it might be when they have some time on their commute, they might pray, or when they feel dis-ease. The regular disciplines are probably motivated by guilt anyway, or a sense of duty, which is probably not good for my wholeness. And so I'm probably not going to do those things. All religious beliefs and practice are questioned. Charles Taylor's great words. All religious doctrine is fragilized. Love that word. It's all fragile. It all is up to me. We question it. You put it out there, and some of it resonates with my inner intuition. Some of it does not. And if it does not resonate with my inner self, I'm not being true to myself if I abide by it. What we don't want is we don't want exclusive beliefs. We don't want judgmentalism. And when we look at external authorities, including those that are in the church, we see bigotry, narrow-mindedness, and blank phobia. Anytime you want to fill that blank in with just about any phobia you want, that's what external authorities are true, because they have not yet found their own authentic self. Spiritual but not religious, SB&R. Spiritual but not religious, by definition, means my spirituality is not very institutional. It tends not to be church-based. It is not based on a location. I do not find it in a group. I am on my own inner spiritual quest to find myself. So I am not probably going to hold strongly to a religious affiliation, but I'm going to dabble in diverse spiritual teachings and practices similar to eating at a buffet. The goal here, remember, is not to get my doctrine right. The goal here is to be subjectively well. We are in a very therapeutic culture, my friends, and the authentic self is a whole self. So in the words of famous sociologists, we are in a subjective well-being culture. That's the zeitgeist. That's what people are seeing across the West, not just in Canada and Britain, in the US, in Australia, in fact, in Asian countries, just about anywhere where there's a developed world. This is increasingly becoming a dominant zeitgeist, the way we think and the way we operate. We will find it, as I'm suggesting, in our schools, and to a certain degree in our churches, particularly those that lean probably toward prosperity gospel. And we see it definitely in our healthcare system, a variety of other places. There's institutional carriers. That's the point. Okay. Done. Book looks like that. Hopefully coming out in April, on the current British and Canadian evangelicals and age of self-spirituality. I basically gave you chapter 2. In the rest of the book, I work out what this looks like in evangelical churches.